The year is 2013. Here's every A-Press minimally required to collect all 120 stars in Super Mario 64. That's 208 of them. Some stages, like most of the early ones, are already pretty empty, but the later stages, especially the very vertical tick-tock clock, are a total nightmare. A revolution is about to happen. In just 2 years from now, nearly all of these will be gone. PanandKoek 2012. Originally starting out just watching videos about the game, he started making his own mark in 2010 by posting videos of getting all the coins available in every stage. But for some of them, he posted the maximum possible score of 255, way above the actual coin count. He pulled that off using a complex technique that even he didn't fully understand at the time. Unfortunately, the videos are pretty low quality. They were done with some free trial of the screen capture software recording Project 64. It could have been worse. It could have been some hot garbage like we've seen before. By 2013, he felt like he had figured out the maximum coin count for every stage, so he moved on into a new direction. He began to investigate all sorts of glitches, sharing his findings in a couple dozen videos, until he felt like he had accumulated enough knowledge to tackle the A-Button challenge. On August 25th, he began a long journey through every single star in the game one by posting an A-Button challenge video for each and every one of them. Among the very first ones he did were 2 Bob-omb Battlefield stars, shoot to the island in the sky, and find the 8 red coins. The main issue with those stars is needing to reach the floating island without using A, and the strategy he came up with was absolutely groundbreaking. While everyone else had been playing checkers, PanandKoek busted out the 4D chess. This was the first stroke of a genius so legendary that it would later earn him his own Wikipedia page. This is the art of cloning. It's only natural that PanandKoek's first major technical breakthrough came through the use of a glitch that he spent years mastering with maximum coin scores. Before we delve into how this magic trick works, we need to understand the cloning glitch and its underlying game mechanics. Buckle up because it's time for a game physics lesson. Okay, a word of warning here. This is going to be very long, but I do not recommend skipping any of it. Cloning is to this day possibly the single most capital technique of this challenge, and skipping its explanation could leave you pretty clueless for a sizable chunk of this history series. So take out your textbooks and let's get started. Before we get to it though, I need to point out that PanandKoek has already covered this subject in scrupulous detail before. In fact, pretty much all the information on game mechanics that I will ever tell you comes directly from his past work. Whenever there's additional material to be read or viewed, there's going to be a numbered note down here. I will cover the most important information to know, but make sure to check out the video description for additional information and links to more complete videos on the subjects at hand. Cloning is made possible thanks to Mario's ability to grab objects. When Mario grabs an object, what you see in his hands is actually a visual copy of the object he's holding. The real object is made invisible and usually intangible until Mario releases it. We'll call these the original object and the held object. Because the original object still exists and is still loaded, but it simply cannot be interacted with, we refer to it as being in limbo. Its animation data is still being updated, but it's no longer being rendered. Meanwhile, the held object is an illusion cobbled together from 3 different sources. Its position is tracked independently, its rotation is copied over from Mario's rotation, and its animation is copied from the original object. What happens with the original object's position depends on what type of object it is. Some stay in place, and some follow Mario around at or near his position. An interesting case to look at is the Bob-omb. Its fuse is lit when Mario grabs it, which causes it to start smoking. Because the held object is just a visual copy, it's not capable of generating smoke particles. The original object is kept close to where the visual copy is so that the smoke particles coming out of the invisible Bob-omb appear to be coming out of the Bob-omb Mario is holding. Additionally, Bob-ombs are an exception in that they stay tangible when held, and that is the root cause of the bloated Bob-omb glitch. For a few frames before it explodes, a Bob-omb dramatically increases in size. If Mario grabs it at the right moment, he can hold it in its bloated state. Mario is then pushed back by the collision with the invisible bloated Bob-omb, and it will keep following him around so long as he's holding it. But what happens if Mario grabs the Bob-omb while it's exploding? Well, this is where it gets fun. But before we get there, we need to understand how grabbing and releasing an object works. When Mario grabs an object, multiple things need to happen. First, the object is established as the target of the grab. Then, Mario's state needs to be changed to holding an object, and the object itself needs to change its state to being held, which turns it invisible and intangible, again, most of the time. For this whole process to function properly, Mario and the original object need to be linked somehow, otherwise Mario could never retrieve an object in Limbo. To achieve this, the game uses a very simple system. Every object that is loaded is assigned the first available slot of 240 object slots. While in reality, object slots have addresses that look a bit like this, for simplicity's sake, let's instead give them a number which ranges from 1 to 240. When Mario grabs an object, the object itself is put in Limbo, and Mario is given a reference number that links him back to it. That reference is the held object, or that visual copy of the original object. The only information the held object needs to have is the number of the slot the original object belongs to. So long as the object is being held, it will stay loaded in Limbo. When Mario releases the held object by throwing or dropping it, the game looks at the reference number and it brings back the associated original object from Limbo. But remember, the original object's position in Limbo doesn't reflect the position of the held object while Mario is carrying it around. When the object is brought back, its position needs to be updated to reflect the held object's last position and complete the illusion. That position is tracked as a set of XYZ coordinates conveniently called the held object's last position, or the hope for short. While Mario is holding an object, the hope is constantly updated to match the position of Mario's hands, and as soon as Mario releases it, the original object is instantly warped to the hope as the held object disappears. There's one small but key detail. To help create a seamless transition, the original object isn't placed exactly at the hope depending on Mario's animation. When Mario's dropping an object to the ground, the game aligns it with the hope horizontally, but places it at Mario's vertical position, which sets it down on the ground. Most of the time, this entire process is seamless and goes exactly according to plan. But it's not airtight, and the tiny cracks in it are just enough to let a clever and meticulous player cause a complete meltdown. Remember that when an object is being grabbed, both Mario and the object change their state independently from each other and are linked together by the held object. In the case of a diving grab or a water grab, all of this happens at the same time. But for a punching grab, the signal to change states is established 2 frames before the actual state change. This gap can be abused if the original object unloads during those 2 frames. There are multiple ways to cause that to happen. The most common are to let a cork box sit still for 30 seconds and to grab it in the final 2 frames before it disappears, or to grab a Bob-omb as it's exploding. Anything that causes an object to unload within 2 frames of Mario grabbing it with a punch grab will work, but it's also achievable by touching a loading zone, a trigger that unloads part of a level and loads another part in its place. Unloaded objects can no longer be updated, which means that the original object does not go into Limbo. However, Mario still receives a reference for it in the form of the held object, but that held object is now linked to a vacant object slot or a slot that is ready to load any new object in it. A vacant slot is marked as empty and its contents can no longer be modified. As a result, the held object looks invisible or frozen since it represents the final state of the original object before it unloaded. When a new object is loaded in that slot, the reference now points to a completely different object than what was originally intended. While it appears like we've cloned a new object, this is not true yet. Mario is merely holding a reference to the new object, and because that object is not in Limbo, it looks like there are 2 of them at once. However, when Mario throws what he's holding, you can see that the copy disappears and the original object is warped near Mario's position. But what happens if the new object cannot be thrown, like a Goomba? Each grabbable object has a script that takes care of its behavior when grabbed, dropped, and thrown. If the new object is missing that script, it will simply do nothing when thrown. Its behavior script will essentially be erased and it won't be able to function normally anymore, so it'll stay frozen in place. This has a very important side effect when the object being cloned has a spawner. Spawners are put in place to handle the loading and unloading of a group of objects like a coin line, a coin ring, or a Goomba trio, for example. When Mario moves far enough away from the broken Goomba, it remains loaded, yet its spawner doesn't get the memo, and so it also keeps working just the same. So the Goomba can be spawned again even though a broken copy of it already exists and it has successfully been cloned. Because the process of cloning involves erasing the behavior of the object being cloned, it suffers from inherent limitations. First, the object being cloned needs to have a spawner, otherwise it can only be transported. That can still be useful though, and in fact it is still referred to as cloning even if the object in question isn't actually duplicated. But the most important limitation is that a clone cannot move or behave anything like the object it's supposed to be. Luckily, the interactions that Mario can have with an object aren't handled directly by the behavior script, so clones can be interacted with. Unfortunately, the missing behavior script is responsible for handling the interaction status of the object, so after a single interaction, it also malfunctions. So while Mario can interact with a clone, he can only do it once. For example, throwing a coin clone causes Mario to collect it but leaves it frozen in place and impossible to collect again. Throwing a Goomba clone causes Mario to immediately be knocked back by it, after which it becomes frozen and intangible, essentially making the clone utterly useless. Fortunately, there is a workaround. If Mario throws a Goomba clone while he's falling fast enough, Mario will move out of the way as he releases the clone and they will not collide. So Mario can come back and bounce on it once, and only once. So all Pan and Koek had to do is to clone a Goomba and throw it while falling, then come back to bounce on it and reach the island, right? Wrong. There's one more major problem. To release an object clone, the object being cloned has to be close enough to still be loaded. Unlike objects in Limbo, which are forced to stay loaded for as long as Mario's holding them, cloned objects aren't bound by this rule, so they unload when Mario goes outside a certain radius from their spawners. While over here, the Goomba trio under the island can be loaded, over there, they no longer can. This called for another trick from the bag, remote release. What seems like 2 hours ago, I said that the held object's last position is constantly updated as Mario walks around holding something. It turns out that there's a way to prevent it from being updated. There are a few ways to do this, but for now, we're going to look at the hatted hand glitch. The animation for putting on a hat has 2 stages. During the first stage, Mario is holding the hat in his hand, and in the second stage, the hat is on his head. When Mario picks up a hat, the first stage is triggered, Mario starts holding the hat and the animation plays. Now if Mario is already in the second stage of the animation, and he comes across a second hat to put on, this new hat will be put in his hand, but the animation will finish playing out. The result is that Mario ends the animation with his hat in his hand. Putting on 2 hats in quick succession can happen either by duplicating hats using a warp or by reusing a special cap box before the first one expires. This glitch has important ramifications regarding the hope. If Mario grabs an object while holding a hat, the object will still be held like normal, but Mario will look like he's holding his hat instead. Because the held object isn't being rendered, the hope is not updated like it should. This causes the hope to become disjointed from Mario because the position remains frozen to wherever it was last updated. For example, if Mario releases a quirk box here, then performs the hat in hand glitch and throws a Bob-omb, the Bob-omb will be released where Mario released a quirk box earlier because that's where the hope still is. This is known as remote release. Despite the complex setup and many drawbacks, this is how Pan and Koek managed to get onto the island in Bob-omb Battlefield without using A. First, he grabbed an exploding Bob-omb, which gave him a reference to a vacant object slot. Then he carried it to this gap where he released it to place the hope in midair. Next, he did the hat in hand glitch and used another Bob-omb to clone a Goomba from this trio. Using remote release, he transported that Goomba over to the hope where he could go and bounce on it. Just one Goomba wasn't enough, he needed more to make a bridge to the island. But here's the catch, to place a Goomba further along, the hope needs to be further along, which means Mario himself needs to be further along, so he needs to bounce on this Goomba to place that Goomba. But remember, clones can only be interacted with once, so once Mario bounces on the first Goomba to place the second Goomba, the first Goomba becomes intangible. So after placing the second Goomba, Mario needs to come back and place a third Goomba next to the first one so he can bounce on these two. This process becomes more tedious the longer the gap is, and exponentially so. You see, it's sort of like counting in binary, except the ones are Goombas that you place and the zeros are gaps that need to be filled. The length of the bridge is the amount of ones that you need in a row. Therefore, for a bridge of length 1, you need a single Goomba. For length 2, you need 3 Goombas, length 3, 7 Goombas, length 4, 15 Goombas, and for a bridge of length n, you need 2 to the power of n minus 1. This can rapidly become a problem because the game crashes from having to draw too many triangles if there are somewhere around 40 Goombas on screen. That puts the upper bound of a Goomba bridge's length at only 5. In this case, Panin was able to get across using 3 Goomba bounces, which means he had to place 7 Goomba clones to cross the gap. For the red coins, this was sufficient, but for this star, he needed something extra to reach the star. A Goomba to bounce on would be nice. There are 2 options to get that to happen. The first is to keep the same strategy, set up the hope under the star, then remote release a Goomba clone from elsewhere and reap the benefits. There is one major issue though. Because the wing cap box on the island doesn't allow for the hat-in-hand glitch to be possible, the cloning has to be done off the island after the hope was put on there first. A Goomba bridge is a single-use infrastructure, so 2 trips to the island require 2 separate Goomba bridges. The second option is to release the clone directly at the location. Fortunately, the top of the island is close enough to these Goombas that they can be loaded and therefore cloned while on the island. Unfortunately, Mario can't release the clone without instantly bumping into it and ruining its purpose because there's no way to release it by falling from above. But falling isn't the only method to prevent interacting with the clone that's being released. What if instead, Mario couldn't be knocked back by the Goomba because he was already being knocked back by something else? A damage knockback forces Mario to drop whatever he's holding, and it also prevents him from interacting with the Goomba clone being released this way, so it is the perfect idea on paper. But one hurdle remains. Mario still needed something to take damage from. Now if you remember 2 million years ago, I mentioned that dropping an object has a slightly different effect than throwing it. It places the object at the hope laterally but at Mario's height, which, because the hope is usually somewhere near Mario's hands, effectively sets the object down on the ground in front of Mario. If the hope is disjointed, however, the effect can be wildly different. Remote dropping an object will place it at the point corresponding to the hope's lateral position in Mario's vertical position, which can be a completely new point otherwise inaccessible. If we go back to the Bob-omb example, dropping the Bob-omb causes it to be placed up there. Going back to Shoot to the Island in the Sky, the star is at a location whose coordinates can easily be reached both laterally and vertically, but not at the same time. By throwing a cork box underneath the star's location, performing the hat-in-hand glitch, and then cloning a cannonball by dropping it here, Pan-and-Koek was able to release the cannonball at the hope laterally but at Mario's height. This left the clone on the island despite Mario never needing to go there himself. Finally, after cloning one last Goomba, he was able to release the clone by getting knocked back by the cannonball. This allowed him to place a Goomba clone without interacting with it, and he could use the bounce to reach the star without pressing A a single time. You may wonder why Panin didn't simply remote drop a Goomba onto the island instead of using a cannonball. That's because there's no way to be at the correct height while still being close enough to a Goomba for it to be loaded. The only Goombas close enough are clones, and because a clone never unloads, it also never reloads, so it's impossible to clone a clone. Also, I glossed over how the Goombas in the cannonball conveniently loaded into the specific object slot that Mario was holding. The reason behind this could be an entire video on its own, and in fact Pan-and-Koek made that video already. But in short, when multiple objects unload on the same frame, such as a coin ring, a Goomba trio, or other groups of objects, they unload in the reverse order that they were loaded in. Through meticulous planning and deep knowledge of object loading behavior, it's possible to manipulate which object will be loaded into Mario's hands. Here, Panin was actually just winging it, retrying over and over until he would get the result he wanted, just like he had been doing for years. But eventually, with enough time and research, he came to master the process of cloning. This groundbreaking strategy was one of the first ever contributions that Pan-and-Koek made to the A-Button Challenge. Unfortunately, as ridiculous as it was, it actually wasn't an improvement. Unbeknownst to him, 2 years prior, the Japanese testers already knew you could simply use a shell and a steep slope to gain super speed backwards and fly across the gap to the island that way. In fact, most of Pan-and-Koek's first videos simply came to the same result as his predecessors. Nonetheless, he did start finding new improvements as well. The very first one was Wiggler's red coins in Tiny Huge Island, using an idea from fellow tester Plush to use a slight kick bounce to reach this platform. This brought the total count down to 207. By the way, quick side note, the count was said to be 228 in 2011 and down to 208 in 2013. Like I mentioned before, early A-Press counts were fuzzy to figure out precisely for all sorts of reasons, and I purposely gave the most conservative estimate. This 208, however, is a pretty solid measure based on the full game-oriented thinking that was implemented during this period and retroactively applied to the known scores at the time. The main discrepancy comes from combining the TikTok Clock 100 coin star with Stump on a Twomp to save 14 A-presses, but there are multiple other small differences as well. After Wiggler's red coins, Pan and Kuik revisited an old strategy for the red coin star of Rainbow Ride. The old 5 A-press strategy was to take the carpet ride to rise up high enough to access this platform in the maze using 1 A-press, then to navigate the maze with the remaining 4. But Pan figured out that you could simply keep reusing the carpet to fall into the maze using only this jump every round trip. With clever routing and platforming, this new strategy brought the A-press count down to only 2. After another dozen stars with no new improvement, he struck again, this time in Whomp's Fortress. Chip off Whomp's block was a relatively simple star. You can get to the top floor of the fortress with no A-presses fairly easily, but the fight itself required 3 ground pounds on Whomp's back, which automatically meant 3 A-presses. That is until Pan had the idea of luring Whomp to the elevator and using the rotating platform to gain airtime and ground pound the mini-boss with no A-presses. Unfortunately, while in the previous strategy the star could be collected instantly after the final hit, this luring strategy meant that Pan would need to find a new way to collect the star without using A. He couldn't find any and left it at 1 A-press, improving it by 2. His next stop was Tal Tal Mountain. Well, not exactly. First, he did a quick trip to Tiny Huge Island to throw this Chuckya, then made his way to Tal Tal Mountain and saved 2 A-presses on Scale the Mountain. He performed the hat-in-hand glitch using the warp to duplicate his hat, cloned the Goomba, and then threw it. You can see the Goomba disappear, but where did it go? Well, it appeared right under the star. And this is why he went to Tiny Huge Island first. The hope only ever gets initialized once when the game is booted up. After that, it only ever gets updated when Mario's holding an object and stays frozen otherwise, including between levels. When Mario threw the Chuckya in Tiny Huge Island, the hope was set at this position. Those same coordinates in Tal Tal Mountain correspond to the top of the mountain right below the star. So with a remote release, Pan was able to place the Goomba up there from all the way down here. There's one detail that I glossed over. How did Mario reach this point up the mountain without jumping? He did it thanks to a new technique called frame walking. Mario can run up steep slopes to a point, but he keeps losing speed until it dips into the negatives, at which point he slides down on his belly. However, when Mario's speed is low enough, if the stick is neutral and then forwards again, Mario will gain speed on the first frame even on the steep slope. By quickly alternating between neutral and forwards, it's possible to walk up steep slopes that way. This climb saved 1 A-press, and the Goomba clone at the top saved another. Now there are 3 other stars in Tal Tal Mountain that also required an A-press to get past this point. Mystery of the Monkey Cage, Breathtaking View from Bridge, and the 100 coin star. Frame walking could get rid of that A-press in all of them. This discovery marked Tal Tal Mountain as the second stage that could be fully completed in 0 A-presses. Soon after, Pan looked into various stars, mostly from the basement levels, and he found some minor improvements to existing strategies along the way. He first went to the Metal Cap course, where a dive recovered from a crystal allowed him to get onto the switch in 0 A-presses, then found a few clever strategies in Shifting Sandland. He used tornadoes and fly guys to reach the red coins without needing to fly or jump, and he bounced on the hand on the final hit and stand tall on 4 pillars to reach the star. He still had to jump once here to get out of the elevator platform and into the fight. He then found a minor improvement in Jolly Roger Bay by combining the 100 coins with the red coin star and by only using B to swim until he had to jump inside the cave for blue coins. Then, back in Shifting Sandland, he cloned the cork box by using remote release to place it partly through the edge of another box and having it explode as it despawned, causing it to give infinite coins. This let him get the 100 coin star in 0 A-presses. Next, he went over to Big Boo's Hout, where one clever strategy allowed him to save A-presses on 4 different stars. He manipulated these bookends to fly to a convenient spot, then used a double bookend bounce to save 1 A-press going to the top of the mansion. This was useful in both Big Boo's balcony and eye-to-eye in the secret room. Additionally, he was able to manipulate the Big Boo to help him reach the top of this box and then the star without any additional A-presses. Bouncing on bookends also allowed him to reach this red coin without using A, which obviously saved an A-press for the red coin star. But also, that made the number of coins attainable in 0 A-presses go from 99 to 101, which meant the 100 coin star was now also possible in 0 A-presses. Another similar method helped save an A-press in Hazy Maze Cave for the 100 coin star. Here, swoopers were used to bounce up to get blue coins and to kill a Sniffit. And after all of these cute little developments, Pan and Koek felt that it was time for another revolution. He switched from Project 64 to Mupen. This time, the revolution was not in the game itself, but technological. He finally got rid of his choppy free trial software captures and got a proper video encoding setup that is Mupen 64 Direct AVI capture. But perhaps the biggest improvement was in passing capabilities. Project 64 only has save states, so all of his videos up to this point were recorded mostly in real time, interrupted with pauses to use save states. Mupen 64 offered Frame Advance, RAM Watch, and many other tools critical to making a good task. He also started saving movie files of his input so that he could go back and improve them, share them with his peers, and archive them for historians to look at 8 years into the future. The result was a crisp, full 30 frames per second cinematic experience of the A-Button Challenge for the second time in history, after the Japanese TAS. With this new high-quality setup, he felt emboldened to tackle the most daunting level in the game, Tick-Tock Clock. He began by lowering Get a Hand to 0 A-presses by figuring out a way to get up the entire rotating platform section by ground pounding into a butt slide face first into the wall. The bonking animation lets Mario stay on the steep slope of the rotating platform without sliding off just long enough that it has time to turn until it's no longer too steep to stand on. Alk Daniel did have a similar strategy that used 1 A-press to get a little higher up at first, but Panen's new method could do it in no A-presses at all. This new strategy did not only save A-presses for Get a Hand, of course. It turned out to be useful for pretty much every star in the level. It saved the only A-press left for the red coin star. He got Roll into the Cage from 4 down to 3. Time jumps on moving bars from 11 down to 7 by also using a precise heave-ho flip to save an A-press, and Stomp on the Thwomp from 15 down to 9 with more efficient platforming combined with all the other strategies, on top of also combining it with the 100 coin star for good measure. Finally, the Pit and the Pendulums was also improved from 6 down to 4 using the rotating red coin platforms and a better jump up to save another A-press. While he was devastating Tick-Tock Clock, Panen also tackled Bowser in the Sky. The previous record of 13 A-presses was relatively well done, but Panen found 3 spots where it could be improved. First, this section where precise slide kicks could let Mario get around these obstacles instead of over them. Second, another precise dive recover let him cross the gap between these platforms, and finally, a Goomba manipulation to bring it down to be bounced on saved the third A-press to bring the star down to 10. Pan and Koek's next stop was Dire Dire Docks. There, his first improvement was massive. He brought pole jumping for red coins, a nightmare of a star for the A-Button Challenge, from 10 A-presses down to 3.5. Wait, what? How does that make sense? There's actually a simple explanation for it. Allow me to introduce the half A-press. Water levels are a special kind of problem for the A-Button Challenge because you need to tap A constantly to swim. If you don't press A, then Mario's underwater movement options are extremely limited. He can slowly sink down to the bottom, or if he's close enough to the surface, slowly rise up to it. He can grab with B, which moves him forward a little bit in this long animation. Or if he gets a hold of one, he can grab a Koopa shell and move around faster for a short time. But sometimes, Mario can be swimming while holding an object, a useful situation that we'll discover in a minute. In that case, B swimming can't be used because Mario would throw that object instead of swimming. There is one solution. If A is held instead, Mario will swim like this, including while holding an object. But since it does require A to be held, that method uses one A-press. Or does it? If you were to do the star in isolation, sure, that would be true. But in the context of a full game run, you could press A earlier for some other star that requires an A-press, and simply hold out that A-press for as long as you need. If you do that, the two A-presses would combine into one single long A-press that achieves multiple purposes at once. So why is it called 3.5 A-presses? The 0.5 notation serves as a middle ground to show the duality of the situation. When counting the star by itself, you round up the A-press count to 4, and when taking other stars in consideration as part of a full game run, you would round it down to 3 because it would leech off of a previous star's A-press. 3.5 A-presses is better than 4 in full game runs, but worse than 3 in isolation, so it makes sense to fit it in the middle. Now that that's cleared up, how did Panon actually improve that star by so much? First, he grabbed the Koopa shell from the bottom and carried it up to the surface. If Mario is swimming with the shell and the timer expires or he touches dry land, the shell will disappear. This timer, being quite short, effectively makes shells useless in normal play. But here's the clever part. This only happens if Mario is swimming with the shell, but he can also throw it. When Mario throws the shell, for a few frames he still holds onto it, but he's no longer swimming with it. So by throwing the shell and interrupting that throw by surfacing, Mario bypasses destroying the shell and can keep it indefinitely. So now he can carry it wherever he wants. However, the shell no longer functions like an underwater Koopa shell, but rather like any held object. To be able to go anywhere with it, Mario needs A to be held to swim. This is why this star requires an extra half A press. But where does he need to go with that shell? In that tunnel is a loading zone, a trigger that switches between the rooms when Mario crosses it. The switch involves unloading the first room and loading the second, all the objects in them included, to save memory. Now, what happens if Mario goes through the loading zone and unloads an object that he's currently holding, like a Koopa shell? Cloning, of course. After unloading the Koopa shell, Mario holds a vacant slot which can now contain newly loaded objects that aren't supposed to be held. Again, with clever planning, Pan & Kowick manipulated a pole to load into the slot that Mario was holding so that he would be able to carry it around and throw it somewhere. Note that because poles aren't handled by a spawner, this is an instance of cloning that doesn't duplicate but merely transports the pole. So Pan had to be mindful of which pole he would transport to make sure he didn't get rid of a pole he would need to use afterwards. After releasing the clone, he could climb it and reach the upper platform in a single A press. From here, it was mostly a matter of navigating around the poles without jumping, sometimes requiring some sketchy diving and grabbing. One more jump was required to get to the furthest pole, and back in the water he went. He needed another A press and a second pole clone to reach the final red coin, helped by the fact that these poles are actually longer than their visual model suggests. All that was left was the star, which unfortunately wasn't easy to reach either. But thankfully, just like any other object, stars can also be cloned. Remember that releasing an object clone physically moves that object to the new location. Clones aren't just broken copies of an object, they are the actual object. They only become a copy if a spawner spawns the original object again. So the star that Mario is collecting is absolutely real. He's able to collect it remotely without any additional A presses, for a total of 3, plus having to hold A at the beginning. For the rest of Dire Dire Docks, the half A press shell swimming strategy to clone a star was relevant for most stars, aside from Manta Ray's reward, which didn't require any A presses, and the 100 coin star, which for now Pan left alone. Also, Chest in the Current did require A swimming as well, not because of cloning, but because of the whirlpool forcing Mario to swim at least a little bit more efficiently. This brought down the total A press count by 4 because 4 stars that were previously listed as needing 1 A press could now be completed simply by leeching off of a previous A press instead. But the half A press was not going to be limited only to Dire Dire Docks. It proved useful in Wing Mario Over the Rainbow as well. Holding A has more benefits like falling slower while twirling, which remember was already known over a decade earlier. But also, holding A allows Mario to fall slower with the wing cap and to kick by tapping the B button. Kicking can help Mario get up steep slopes, although frame walking obsoletes that one. Here, however, falling slower with the wing cap allows Mario to reach the bottom platform to shoot out from the cannon. Because this star still requires 2 cannon shots, the A press count was now 2.5. At this point, aside from a few stray stars, the only levels left for Pan & Kowick to explore were Snowman's Land and Wet Dry World. Snowman's Land was already nearly figured out before Pan even touched it, but Wet Dry World totaled 18 A presses, nearly half of which were for the red coin star alone. So there was a lot of potential for improvement. Pan started with secrets in the shallows and sky. Note that because entering levels is also an implicit part of the challenge, you can't just enter Wet Dry World any way you want. The initial water level depends on the height at which Mario enters the painting, so with no jumps, the only available initial water level is the lowest one. Thankfully, there's a warp to the cannon platform at the top of the stage, and there are heave-hoes that can flip Mario up to higher levels. Pan used a combination of those to get most of the secrets, but the last one was a bit trickier. The previous strategy was to use a cannon shot to reach it, but instead he got a helping hand from Chuckya. He manipulated the random number generated by the game, or RNG value, to be favorable so that Chuckya would throw Mario directly onto the wooden bridge, which let him access the final secret in 0 A-presses. He used the same strategy to save an A-press in Express Elevator Hurry Up and the 100 coin star. Top of the Town was still problematic because despite being able to get all the way to breaking the box in 0 A-presses, he had to jump to get the star. The old strategy from 2008 was to use a cannon shot to go directly on top of the box and ground pound it, but remember, shooting the cannon is an unavoidable A-press, so both methods came up to the same result of 1 A-press. But the real problematic stars were Quick Race Through Downtown and the Red Coin Star. Those were sitting at 5 and 8 A-presses respectively before PanandKoic had a crack at them. The solution he found for each of them is pretty complex, so let's start with Quick Race Through Downtown. When Mario throws Chuckya, it will explode into 5 coins upon landing. This explosion happens based on Chuckya's state of being thrown. Here, Mario throws Chuckya and falls off the ledge at the same time, which lets him catch up to it and intercept it while it's falling down. Chuckya then grabs Mario in midair, which changes its state from being thrown to holding Mario. Therefore, when it lands on the ground, it no longer wants to explode, which effectively brings Chuckya down to this level. From there, Panan abuses object collision priority and uses Chuckya to push Mario inside of the block and throw Chuckya through the wall. Immediately after, he gets caught by Chuckya again, and both of them fall down into the pipe below, where Mario can retrieve Chuckya and carry it around in the water. There are other ways to bring Chuckya here, but this clever method uses no A-presses to do so. Once Mario is holding Chuckya underwater, he needs to swim. He could do that simply by holding A, but unfortunately that doesn't work after pressing B to grab an object, so he actually needs to press the A button once. But from there, he has a hold of an object and the tunnel contains a loading zone that switches between the main area and the downtown part of Wet Dry World, so he can clone the Quick Race Through Downtown star. Note that the cloning of a star can only be done if the star is already out there and collectible, so the same can't be done for something like the red coins, for instance. But just like that, he managed to get that star from 5 down to only 1 A-press. The red coin star was definitely the most challenging because it posed multiple problems at once. To access most red coins, Mario needs to break a box, which he can only do out of the water. However, if the water level is low, then he needs a lot of A-presses to reach the higher platforms. So he both needs the water level to be high so that he can navigate without using A, but also to be low so that he can break the boxes the coins are in. If he lowers the water to break a box, he needs a way to raise it back up, and the only crystal that raises the water is way up there, inaccessible on the water without jumping a bunch of times. This web of restrictions is nearly impossible to navigate. But if it's nearly impossible, it's not impossible. But there was a price to pay. In his own words, that star was a total pain to record and edit. And you know what? I believe him. The strategy takes 14 hours to execute. Of course, breaking down how all of it works would be too gigantic of a task. So let's do it. If you pay close attention, you can see that even when it's at a fixed height, the water level bobs up and down by a significant amount. This is not purely visual. The actual water level follows a sinusoidal function with an amplitude of 20 units and a period of 128 frames. In other words, the water has a median level and it deviates from that median by up to 20 units on a cycle that repeats every 4 seconds or so. The downtown area's water level is independent from the main area. When Mario goes from downtown to the main area, the water level is preserved for when he comes back. But here's the key thing, the current water level is saved and then used as the median water level when Mario comes back. Therefore, if Mario loads the downtown area and unloads it when the water is above the median, when he comes back, the new median will be here and the water level will rise and dip 20 units around that new line. If you repeat this process, you can raise the water level arbitrarily high 20 units at a time. If you do the opposite and leave when it's below the median, you can lower it the same way. However, this is easier said than done. The loading zone is in the middle of an underwater tunnel, which means Mario cannot simply stay here and swim in circles around the loading zone to raise or lower the water as he pleases. He needs to get some air from time to time, so the water in the main area needs to be at its lowest level. To access this corner, you can simply slide along this ledge, carefully keeping Mario on with a precise angle and stick movement. And now, Mario has just barely enough time to lower the water level once before he has to rush back and get some air. So this process is extremely tedious. To get this part done without actually repeating all of this work over and over for days, Pan and Quick figured out a way to make a sequence of inputs that would be loopable, and repeated it for however many iterations he needed. After lowering the water 26 times, he could finally enter downtown. By now, the water was low enough that he could get some air inside the tunnel itself, and he could go and break this first box. But as you can see, this grate prevents him from lowering the water any more than that because it would block access to downtown if he did. So Panin had to raise the water instead. He does so for 4 hours. In that time, the water level is raised 398 times. Now the water level is far above the top of the stage. At this point, it's so high up that when Mario touches a low crystal, he has time to swim up to a higher platform before the water level catches up. Or at least he would if he had enough air. Unfortunately, B-swimming is so slow that Mario would drown before he got there. But thankfully, coins restore energy. By grabbing a few coins along the way, Panin was able to extend his underwater time just enough to make this genius route possible. After this high anxiety swim up to the top, Mario is now high up in 0 A presses, while the water is low, which lets him break boxes, and he has access to the high crystal so he can raise the water back up and go back to the main area if needed. He activates the high crystal and dives down to one of the boxes to break it just before the water catches up. From there, he only needs to get some air and he can go back and repeat this process again to break more boxes. And that's what he does. For another 4 hours, he raises the water 366 times and repeats the same process. However, coins are limited, so he has to become more and more creative with how he uses them to buy himself more underwater time. The longer he has to go out of his way to get more coins, the more coins he needs to get to offset that extra time. This time, he has just barely enough time to break this second box. Then he goes back and raises the water another 376 times, uses up the last few yellow coins he has to his disposal, and breaks one more box. In one final trip, he raises the water 154 times and then, with almost no coins left to keep him alive, collects all the red coins that he left behind specifically for this moment, and he breaks off the last few boxes and gets the star. All of that in 0 A presses and only 14 hours. Even among all the cloning he had done, this single star was probably the most intense strategy Pan and Quick had pulled off up to this point. It also saved an astonishing 8 A presses in a single go, making it to this day the largest single improvement in the challenge's history. And he wasn't even done yet. But he was almost done. He took a look at the red coin stars in the first 2 Bowser stages and found some improvements in them. In Bowser in the Dark World, he lured a Goomba down here so he could bounce on it and used frame walking to tilt the bridge 90 degrees and go up to a red coin, saving 3 A presses in total to bring it down to 2. In Bowser in the Fire Sea, he was able to use a Bob-omb to clone the star, saving the 2 A presses normally required to get up to it and grab it. In the final level he still had to go through, Snowman's Land, only 2 A presses remained and he was able to save one of them. He got in the deep freeze from 1 to 0 A presses using Koopa Shell Hyperspeed. This had already been used before by the Japanese Tassers, but I glossed over it until now. Here's how it works. The way speed on slopes is handled is fairly simple. When Mario is moving on a slope, his speed is calculated in such a way that he moves the same distance along that slope than if he were on flat ground. So with a speed of 30 on flat ground, Mario will move 30 units forward. But on a 30-degree slope, Mario will move by 30 units along the slope, which translates to 15 units up and 26 units forward. The way the game does this is that it factors Mario's speed by the cosine of the slope he's on to determine his lateral movement and then moves him up or down to match the new height of the floor. This effective speed, which is always equal to or lower than Mario's real speed, is called the de facto speed. Now this method works flawlessly when Mario is running parallel to the direction of the slope, but if he's moving perpendicularly to it, this speed reduction no longer makes sense. Nonetheless, it is still applied no matter which direction Mario is moving in. This is why he appears to slow down when going from flat ground to sloped ground despite keeping a similar speed, and this is the mechanic that makes Shell Hyperspeed possible. When Mario tries to ride up a steep slope, he'll rapidly lose speed and even slide back down the slope. But if he's angled right, something interesting can happen. The backwards acceleration is the same so long as Mario is facing up the slope, even if he barely is. Because the slope is so steep, his de facto speed is a tiny fraction of his real speed, so he basically stays in place despite his increasingly high speed. So by facing ever so slightly up very steep slopes, he can accumulate over 200 negative speed, about 7 times more than regular walking speed. All he needs to do next is to redirect that speed to propel himself to the star in 0 A presses. There were only a few stars left. Rainbow Ride 100 coins was moderately easy with the techniques Panin had developed. After 1 A press to reach the cruiser, he was able to get a hold of an exploding Bob-omb and clone 51 coins to reach 100 without having to go around the whole course. By the way, a quick detail, while there are other Bob-ombs in Rainbow Ride, to grab an exploding Bob-omb, Mario needs to be at least a tiny bit higher than the explosion, either with a higher ledge or a slope. Rainbow Ride's floors are almost all perfectly flat, so the best way to clone a Bob-omb was to use the rim of the ship to provide the height differential. Dire Dire Doc's 100 coins was a little more complicated. Using the shell method that he used to clone poles in a star, he could clone coins, but there is a more efficient method. Instead of cloning coins one by one, he could clone an entire ring of coins. Like we've seen before, rings of coins are handled by an intangible invisible object called the spawner. On top of deciding when to load or unload a group of coins, it also keeps track of which of its coins have been collected so it can stay consistent when you load the coins in and out of memory. However, just like every other object, coin ring spawners can be cloned. Here's how the process works. The cloning part works exactly the same. But to clone an object, you need to be holding a vacant slot for it to load into. The problem with spawners is that they are loaded when you enter the level, and they always stay loaded no matter how far Mario is from them. There is, however, one exception. If a level has multiple segments separated by a loading zone, such as Wet Dry World or Dire Dire Docks, then it is possible to load and unload a spawner. When a spawner is cloned, it will simply look like an invisible object. Just like any other object not meant to be thrown, once the clone is released, it will cease to function properly. So it will also stop handling the loading and unloading of the coin ring. If a coin spawner clone is released, its associated coin ring will no longer load when Mario goes near it. But if the spawner clone is released while the coins are already loaded, then they will no longer unload when Mario goes far away. Also, when a coin from a coin ring is cloned, because its behavior is broken, it will be unable to send a signal to its spawner to indicate that it's been collected, so the spawner will spawn it again when Mario goes near, thus duplicating the coin. This works exactly the same way if the spawner is the one being cloned. The coins in a ring can be collected, and it will send a signal to the spawner that they no longer should be loaded the next time the ring is loaded, but the spawner will be unable to receive the message. So when Mario reloads the area through the loading zone, the reloaded spawner will have no memory of the coins being collected and it will spawn them all over again. This method can be used specifically in Dire Dire Docks to duplicate whole rings of coins at once instead of one at a time, significantly speeding up the process. This is what Panin did. He got 56 extra coins from 7 coin ring spawner clones and got the 100 coin star in 0.5 A presses. Around this time, he also found an improvement in Wet Dry World in Express Elevator Hurry Up. He found that by raising the water level, he was able to hold A and swim onto the elevator instead of jumping to it. The timing for it is very tight, but it is indeed possible. This reduced the A press count from 1 to 0.5 because he needed A to be held and not pressed. At this point, Paninkoek was nearing the end of his journey through every star in the game. He realized that he also needed to account for all the A presses necessary to navigate the castle between all the levels. So he dedicated a video to all of them. Most of it is pretty trivial, and like I discussed before, the total comes up to 23 if you're being efficient. He found one precise side flip to grab the ledge to Rainbow Ride on one side and wing Mario over the rainbow on the other, which brought the total down to 21. He proved that the 5 stars available inside the castle itself were all obtainable in 0 A presses. And he completed his meticulous run through the complete A button challenge in Whump's Fortress by doing Fall into the Caged Island the same way the Japanese Tasters did it a few years prior. Finally, after all of this work, Paninkoek with some help from Plush managed to cut the 120 star A press count nearly in half from 208 to 116. But we lost track of time during this epic journey. How many years have passed? 3 years? 4 years? Maybe even 5 years? How about 2 months? That's right, this entire revolution of the Super Mario 64 A button challenge took 2 months from beginning to end. And the best part? He was only getting started.